Hello, greetings. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And firstly, thanks for my friend Usha for inviting me to present at this event. This is the first time I'm speaking about this subject, although I've spoken about it before. But I think that this hopefully should help parents, and I've kind of put it in the perspective of thinking about parents. And so a little bit about myself. So my name is Ajit Jaokar. I am obviously diagnosed with autism as an adult, and I wanted to share my experiences really as a parent for parents as well, and hopefully this should be useful. Now, who am I in professional sense? I am the course director of multiple artificial intelligence courses at the University of Oxford, and I'm also a fellow at for engineering sciences at Oxford, a visiting fellow at engineering science for Oxford, and also I am on the board of multiple startups, and I have been associated with other universities, and I have a consulting research company. So in a sense, I think that um, that my kind of background is unconventional. The career path is quite unconventional, and this is perhaps the biggest theme I wanted to emphasize to parents, because in many ways the challenge with someone like us is that we attempt to fit in, and perhaps that should not be the case. Is my sort of a takeaway from this idea. So. Basically, I was diagnosed with autism as an adult, and I hope that my insights would be helpful for adults and especially for parents. And I have a teenage son who is also on the high functioning autism scale. And like I said, I know the words high functioning and Asperger's are sort of have their own baggage, but that's the best word I can think of. And in many ways, I first saw the movie Rain Man, and I thought that this was not me. Because it didn't resonate with my experiences. But I subsequently found out through some of my friends at Google, Microsoft, Oxford, etc., this is actually quite common, and that there is no real sort of a demarcation way of doing these things, and that it is essentially a spectrum. And so this is how I got diagnosed to a therapist in the UK, and that's really how I took the journey. And perhaps my experiences are a little bit more UK centric, because while I was born in India, I have almost for the majority of my working life worked outside of India. And I've specifically worked in the UK far more, and I'm a British citizen. So I guess my kind of perspective is a little bit from that side. But that sort of thought was that I sort of I kind of thought about putting these ideas into a series of bullet points, and I've talked about this once on my blog, and I thought that that's the sort of theme I will use in this session as well. And there are no real particular sort of specific order, but my thoughts are really that it's important to play to your strengths. And it took me a long time to realize this, because I tried to fit into career paths which are more traditional. That included trying to set up a startup, and that included trying to get VC funding. That included trying to go into a typical career path of sort of becoming be going to into a company and trying to work through a company's sort of political, how shall we say, structures, and none of that really worked. So what I really do today is a strange mixture of entrepreneurship and academia, which traditionally do not seem to meet. But in my case, I seem to have found out something which I like. which is the intersection of domains. And this, I think, is one of my biggest thoughts on this, that if you are a child or if you're a parent, I think that it's more important to understand what your strengths are, and then try to play to those strengths, as opposed to trying to fit in into something else. And this is something which people do realize, like me, at much later on in my life. But I think that at least I can say that at some point I did, not by intent, I must add. Through series of incidents and sort of developments, but that's my first point. Second one is reading. So even as a child, I read extensively, and that kind of reading helped me to overcome many of the challenges I had, um, and that included reading things like literature. Now, um, the way I saw it was a kind of way to understand people. And when I'm talking about literature, I'm talking about classics. I'm talking about Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Moby Dick and things like this. Whatever takes your interest. And I would read what was in India was called Classics Illustrated, which is a kind of comics which talk about classic books in illustrated format, something like Amar Chitrakatha, and of course Amar Chitrakatha as well. I started off like that, and then actually graduated to the books themselves. But my point was that was interesting for me, and also it was useful for me because it's a kind of a way to understand a template of people without actually having to meet people. And I think that was useful. And from a formal diagnosis perspective, I think in the UK you definitely need to get this to a professional. You wouldn't get unlikely to get it on the NHS, so you would have to approach it privately. But that's just my experience with that. I do not know how it is in other countries, but I believe that in the UK this was the case, and also in the UK because I had a son and he was diagnosed at his age of 5. So that's the first time there was an inkling that I also might be on the same thing. But it was for me, it was not anything specific because it was not something I wanted to sort of explore at that time. But I did it after about a decade. And again, it was no specific reason, meaning it was more for my understanding, as opposed to getting any benefits from jobs or anything else. Other than sort of these sort of discussions and mentoring people, I have really no direct association with this concept of autism, meaning that I do not engage with any other institutions or things like that, other than the sort of the mentoring I do for people, especially in the maths and science area. But that's my experience with that. And things were very confusing as a child, but things got a lot better when I got older. And this is again, if you read some of the books by people like John Nelder Robinson and people like that, you find that this is actually a common thing, meaning people actually do much better when they grow older. In my case, for some strange reason, the fact that at my age I still continue very heavy maths and science and physics and things which you sort of learned into high school and never actually pursued them further. But in my case, I do. Uh, because of teaching AI, I think that is good. I mean, it was not something it somehow seems to work for me. That it doesn't worry me that people perhaps looked at these things in a way that they sort of get engaged with maths when they're studying, but not when they're professionally working 20 plus years into their career. But for me, that is fine. I mean, this is something I really enjoyed, and this is what I mean, that in many ways an unconventional career path, which sort of doesn't fit into other people's ways of thinking, is a good thing. And that's what I would advise parents. Collecting and classifying things, that's a classic. I'm sure you've seen this before as well. In my cases, it was comic books and stuff like that. And taxonomies are interesting to me even today. I do taxonomies of everything, even including when I teach AI. So I think that's a classic, and that can be used to your benefit because it helps you to put a framework around things. To me, I always like to see a taxonomy or a classification into something, especially when I'm learning new subjects like AI. And I spend a lot of time reading with the initial parts of it, because really there isn't any way to learn AI. Certainly at our age, when we started it, I started about a decade ago. Today, I think there are traditional courses which teach AI, but in the early stages, there definitely wasn't much. So it was all personal reading, and I think that the ability to understand bits and pieces of information, classify them, that's certainly useful. um, Search for structures that suit you. I've already said this, so I think that's good. Choose non-career traditional career paths. I think that's as well. Social strategies. I again find reading a lot useful to understand people, and that's another thing I've sort of mentioned before. Choose complexity. I think that's an important point. I think people tend to view something like this only in terms of the limitation, but I think that. The fact that you can handle certain types of complexity more than other people is something you should focus on. I think so, because I mean, if I hadn't done that, I would have tried to do what everybody else does. The only real challenge in my mind is that it doesn't fully reflect in the education system, nor in the job evaluation system. So what I mean by this is that if you have traditional coding type quizzes, I wouldn't come on the top, nor would I come very high into traditional sort of evaluation structures, because my interests were skewed, meaning that I was very interested in certain things at the expense of other things, and this is a classic again. But that is perhaps something which needs to change. But I found it very hard to understand that the sort of to have the uniform interest in multiple things, and my interests were always skewed even when I was learning something. And I have read Temple Grandin's books, and she also talked about the same thing. Her method of research and study is so slow, and I'm the same in that way, because it takes me a long time to sort of assimilate all the information and form a bigger picture in my mind before then I can then completely master it. But that's not the way traditional things work, because they don't give you that initial amount of time to create all those sort of cross connections. That's how I see them. And I think that this is a challenge to the education system and the employment system. But luckily, I believe it is changing. I mean, I certainly do not recruit people in the traditional way. I tend to perhaps see them far more holistically. And I believe other companies are doing the same as well. And again, there are cultural factors in my case of being an immigrant, and of course, if you're female, that impacts other things as well. And then, like I said, some tasks would take you longer, and then they do for me. And I think that this is something which has been reflected again with other people as well. And then relationship with technology, I think that people think that you would like technology, but for me it's a mixed bag. I find technology very confusing. I have always once talked about a command line phone. So what I meant by command line phone is that it shouldn't have a graphical user interface at all. It literally should be like a Linux prompt, where you type in a key, type in a command, and then off it goes. And I find too much input with technology. But again, that can be controlled, but it is important to acknowledge that and try to control it, because otherwise I find it again quite hard with that. And then I think that the obsessive quest for solitude, I think this is the one thing which is common to almost anybody on the spectrum, on the autism side, because otherwise, like I said, it's a spectrum, and there are ranges of things. But I've always liked this idea that you want to go away, and you need far more period of time with yourself without people. I've studied characters who've done that and perhaps not ended up so well. Christopher McCandless, who basically left everything and went off in a trailer, and Timothy Treadwell, who went to Katmai National Park and was basically attacked by bears. So I think that but the concept of solitude is important for me, and it's something I try very hard to achieve. And final point is, I think that your team matters, your support structure matters, and I'm very fortunate to work at Oxford with my team, both on the technical side and also on the support side with us. And I think that really has made a big difference. But in the initial part of my career, I struggled with that idea that when you had to collaborate with people, it wasn't as easy. But perhaps trying to finding a place where you are sort of respected and supported is very important, and this is how I feel with that. And one final point I would like to stress is about reading. When I was in India very recently, I took this picture on the right hand side. Now that is a bookseller on the in Churchgate side. So if you go to central Mumbai, you find people selling these books like that on the street, on the pavement. And I was obsessed with this idea. I would go and spend a lot of time and money, whatever money I had, trying to buy these books and read these books. And I think it really made a difference. And the picture on the left hand side is the Bodleian Library, where I like to go now at Oxford. And I think that maybe there is a connection between these things. I think that people ignore this fact that sometimes the quiet sort of the person who is perhaps bookish and maybe it is not, it is something which takes a while to assimilate that ideas and knowledge before it manifests itself into something much bigger. And that, I think, is what I would leave you with. So to conclude, what I really wanted to say was essentially the same thing I started off with, was that do not try, if you're a parent or if you're on the spectrum, try do not necessarily try to fit in. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I mean this in a way that that try to find out what is special about you and try to cultivate that special ability, and try to see if that is your calling, so to speak. And it would take you some time to realize that, and would definitely need you some support structure to realize that, and definitely would need your friend structure to realize that. But I believe it is indeed possible. Thank you, and all the best for your journey. Take care. Bye.